Our next guest spent more than a decade as a Pentagon spokesman. Retired Colonel P.J. Crowley is now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. P.J., welcome back. Thanks for your time.
A pleasure, Keith.
What is the appropriate function for Pentagon public affairs and what is not appropriate?
Well, I mean, certainly the Pentagon, as the largest bureaucracy in the world, like any institution, whether it's the military or Microsoft, it should be communicating with the American people, and through the media, it's the best way to do that. The Pentagon spends more money than anybody else. We have, 2.5 million of our best and brightest in uniform, and the American people should have a day-to-day account of what the military is doing on its behalf. Usually when the Pentagon says it has a message problem, it's really unhappy with the story that's being reported by the media. In the case of Iraq, for example, you've had Secretary Rumsfeld on a regular basis has said the media's got the story wrong. And of course, the media has the story right, which is why you see the polling data that you reported on earlier.
Does it seem odd to you, though, that the Pentagon would be setting out in a new way to try to correct the record on the same day that the Army says its own communications flaws led to 7 families getting false information about their loved ones' deaths? Because if the miscommunications were innocent miscommunications, shouldn't we expect them to cast the Army in a better light or a worse light about equally, but they consistently favor the Army? I mean, how credible is that explanation?
Well, certainly at one level, the Pentagon is not nimble, and it's facing this new accelerating wide 24/7 media environment. It's trying to adapt. That said, the military is a traditional institution, and while it does a lot of things well, every once in a while, particularly with respect to situations, friendly fire, where people have made mistakes, the system seizes up, and that's certainly what happened. In the case of these families, particularly the Tillman family, the system failed the Tillman family flat out.
Did the system seize up today relative to Sadr City? I mean, we heard that tape of Mr. Rumsfeld a moment ago saying you have to pick up the phone to find out if the Prime Minister of Iraq ordered U.S. troops out of those checkpoints in Sadr City. How is it that the most unilateral administration that any of us have probably lived through has got American soldiers taking orders from Iraqis who are probably taking orders from this Muqtada al-Sadr?
Well, I guess with Mr. Rumsfeld, we now have another known unknown. Yeah. I guess. I mean, this is less a military problem than it is a political problem. Obviously, within the military, you have civilian control, and we're living and working and fighting in Iraq, and the Iraqis should have a say about what the military does. But this is primarily a political problem in that if you look at solutions in Iraq, and they're fleeting, and there were no good answers in Iraq, of course, one of them has to be disarming the militias. The state does not have a monopoly on the use of force, and that is a critical problem and a source of instability. Unfortunately for the United States, when you look at Mr. Maliki, part of his base is al-Sadr and the Mahdi army, and what politician gets reelected by trying to disarm his base?
Mr. Rumsfeld also said something today that we haven't discussed, that he expects the U.S. will have to train more than the 325,000 Iraqi security forces that were originally targeted for December. At the same time, the LA Times reported that a growing number of officers think timelines for withdrawals would be a good idea. Mr. Bush would never tell us before the election on this, but what is your best bet for the 8th of November? More troops in or more troops out?
Well, I certainly don't think that there are going to be more U.S. troops. One, we don't have them. And two, if you add troops to the situation in Iraq, you continue to feed the perception of occupation that drives at least some of the violence that we see. The Pentagon has played a little bit of a numbers game on Iraqi security forces. It's not so much the numbers as their capability. And what we're seeing is that whatever the number, it's going to take longer where an Iraqi security force, policeman or military, can replace a U.S. soldier. That's a real problem. I think the military has it right, that in some fashion you've got to put more pressure on the Iraqi government to break through the current political logjam and try to get some things done.
An extraordinary situation continues to get more so. P.J. Crowley, Senior Fellow and Director of National Defense and Homeland Security at the Center for American Progress. Good to talk to you, sir. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Keith.